Well, greetings. This is lecture 2 of week 4. In the first lecture of this week, we began a discussion regarding the postures of movement toward the neighbor. We've been reminded that the approach requires prudence and respectful pace. The approach will lead us, based upon the passage of Luke chapter 10, to understand that the first posture of approach is one of vulnerability. And if we're to follow the passage of Jesus, I would suggest that the second posture is both born from the first and reinforces the first. This is coming in a posture of peace. Remember in Matthew chapter 5 that Jesus clearly recognizes the need to come and root peace in the life of the one who lives out the call of the kingdom. He states, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they are sons and daughters of God." Jesus anchors the identity as children of God in one's capacity to live in the shalom of God and the making of peace with others. I have to note, pointing back to week 1, the posture of peace is far more difficult than most of us are aware of. Again, in a culture that has been dominated by both threat and fear, our primary posture is one poised for aggression by the preemptive preparation to be aggressive. Violence seems to loom over our lives as a shield against threat. Violence, an often celebrated practice in our Western culture, in the heroes that are recognized, in the narratives that are told, and in the way that history is marked, especially in the United States, violence appears to be, in the words of Chris Hedges, a force that brings meaning to our lives. Anticipation of threat means preparation for reaction, retaliation, and retribution. But the one who goes in vulnerability goes as one who has laid down their arms, one who has refused to take anything with them that could send the message of impatience, intolerance, or self-sufficiency. Verse 4 says, "Do not take a purse or bag or sandals." In living exposed and going empty-handed, void of those tools that we've picked up along life's path that can strike before being stricken, the Christian neighbor recognizes that proximity requires the empty-handedness of the peacemaker. Now, not that empty-handedness of making peace is one of passive acquiescence to the threat of the damage that the other will do to us. Instead, making peace is proactive. It urgently moves toward the other, foregoing the delay of those with whom we are already the most comfortable with. Remember, Jesus says in the rest of verse 4, "And do not greet anyone on the road." That's always the threat to Christian neighboring. In identifying those with whom we already feel safe, secure, and vulnerable among, we will get distracted from the call to go out from ourselves and beyond ourselves. We will get delayed along the road in our comfort. But this peacemaking recognizes the urgent call of courage to move toward the other, to move as one who's been given a gift, who has received the gift of God's shalom and recognizes it as a gift to be shared. See, the gift of God's shalom is rooted in God's acceptance. For the one that has already been accepted by God as the beloved of God has their identity secure. The peacemaker recognizes that with identity secured, there's no need to live in the insecurities that often posit us above others or in competition with others. The other's presence to us is not a threat to our identity. The gift of God's shalom is rooted in the forgiveness of God. The one who has received the gift of God's reconciliation then bears that gift in their body as calling toward the other. They come not as one who seeks to win or get one over the other, but who longs for the other to live into that same forgiveness, that same reconciliation that we ourselves have received. This is the calling of 2 Corinthians chapter 5, in which peacemakers are called ambassadors of reconciliation. Shalom is the aura of one who has made peace with God. That aura of peace and harmony then pervades their going out and their coming in. It is carried with them as the mark of their lives. The passage then moves to the announcement of peace and the resting of peace upon the other. There's something profound in our postures that suggest we come in peace. Understand that given the context that I've mentioned above, that announcement might very well be met initially by skepticism or doubt. For many of those that we would call the other, those announcements have often been followed by backhanded attempts to manipulate, coerce, or ingratiate the other to the one who supposedly comes in peace. But if the peace is true, it will land and find a home among some. Among others, it might be returned. We must understand that in our world, there is no guarantee that our peace will be received as a gift. Instead, it often requires the willingness to be met by some form of violence. In those cases, it's the willingness to absorb someone's violence, but the recognition that we aren't bound to remain in that hostility forever, but may at times be called to move on or move away from that space towards someone or to the one where that seed of peace planted in fertile soil can bear the fruit of healing and reconciliation. The one who comes in peace is the one who comforts in a time of mourning and extends a hand in time of need. The one who comes in peace guards integrity, recognizing that any time trust has been granted, it is to be cherished and honored, guarded with the utmost care and consistency. The one that comes in peace refuses to categorize the other through stereotyping and shallow assessments based on arbitrary categories of race, sexual orientation, religion, ethnic background, or political leanings. The one that comes in peace is the one that is ready to offer the benefit of the doubt and is prone to extend forgiveness instead of clinging to grudges. The one who comes in peace, according to Jesus, borrows without demands of return, gives to the needy without demand for recognition or payback, and lives willing to offer the other cheek instead of being armed by reactive response. The shalom of God as the aura of Christian neighboring is a countercultural movement in and among many that we will step into their spaces. See, they've been conditioned by conflict and drama, by abrasive social media comments and by bullying, by physical and emotional abuse, and by spiritual self-righteousness that wields holiness like a blunt force object instead of a love of God that is more like a salve into the soul. It may be this peacemaking posture that has the greatest potential of quelling the violence of the other. Perhaps one of my favorite illustrations of this is the Gerasene demoniac, crossing the side of the lake that would have been otherwise off limits to the Jews, venturing into a land where the assumption was dividedness and hostility. Jesus is immediately met by a man whose condition had made him prone to outbursts of violence. His violence had been met by the tit-for-tat of his neighbors. He'd been the recipient of their countercultural hostility, ejection, and alienation, binding him and dismissing him as too wild, dangerous, and troublesome for the more polite of society. Isn't it interesting how the polite society often uses the tools of civility to enact the same sanctioned violence the criminal or the threat has used? But when Jesus arrives on the shores, he comes in peace and is met by fury. Yet his unflappable presence of shalom is what ultimately resets that space of threat and turns it into a space of redemption. His I come in peace landed, remained, and bore the fruit of reconciliation. And we are called to do likewise in a posture of peace. Next lecture, we will look at the third and final posture for this week, one that we will call witness.